crystallizes his grip on the GOP, said USA Today. Thomas Massie's defeat tightens Trump's grips in the New Republic. And so, word for word, did the BBC. The New York Times, mixing things up a bit, said Trump tightens his grasp on the GOP. The question they ought to be asking is, who is gripping or grasping President Trump? Pro-Israel donors and lobbyists spent at least $15 million on the campaign against Thomas Massie. It's the most expensive primary in US history. Millions of dollars came from AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. You might therefore assume that Massie was a raving anti-Semite who used his platform to trash Israel at every opportunity. But he didn't. In fact, until recently, he barely spoke about Israel at all. And that, apparently, was his main offense.
There's a foreign interest group called AIPAC that, got the ear of this current speaker and demanded 16 votes in April on Israel or the Middle East. We haven't had 16 votes in April on the United States in Congress. Ostensibly, it's a group of Americans who lobby on behalf of Israel. They're for anything Israel. And they're a very effective lobbying group. They get in there. They try to get me to write a white paper as a candidate, for instance, for Congress. They almost get
on what?
On Israel. And I wouldn't do it. And they said, why? And I'm like, I don't do homework for lobbyists, right? I'm like, I didn't like writing term papers at college. I'm not writing one for you.
Well, the campaign against Thomas Massie painted a grim picture of a scheming figure of dubious morals who went out of his way to make life difficult for Trump. In fact, he voted with the Republican Party more than 90% of the time. Massie is staunchly against expensive military interventions and foreign aid, especially the Iran war. He's a leading critic of wasteful government spending and unmanageable debt. He's campaigned relentlessly for the total release of the Epstein files and for the prosecution of men whose crimes they expose. In other words, his platform is a lot like the one that got Trump elected. So how did he become MAGA enemy number one? Well, it probably has something to do with statements like this.
The people who are funding the ballroom, the people who are funding the arch, the people who are funding the rebranding of the Kennedy Center, these are the people who are also funding my opponent. These are the people who have the ear of the president. These are the people who are dominating our foreign policy decisions. They're the billionaires. And these are also the same people who are in the Epstein files.
So, a Massie gone, at least for now, it's very reasonable to ask what it all means for the future of a MAGA government in some turmoil. Has Trump tightened his grip on MAGA, or has the donor class tightened its grip on Trump? Joining me to debate all this is Will Chamberlain, Senior Counsel of the Article 3 Project, Glenn Greenwald, the host of System Update, Clay Travis, founder of Outkick, and Buckley Carlson, the former Republican strategist and speechwriter. Well, welcome to all of you. Any Arsenal fans amongst you before we get anywhere?
Sure, I'll be an Arsenal fan today for you.
Thank you, Will Chamberlain. In that case, you're going to get an easier ride than normal. For American viewers who are a little mystified by what an Arsenal is, if it doesn't involve the US military, I can tell you it's my football team. I'm not going to use the word soccer in one of my own shows. And we've just won the Premier League for the first time in 22 years, which has made me the happiest human being on God's earth. And on that positive note, I now expect you very quickly to be tearing each other from limb to limb. Glenn Greenwald, it's an interesting scenario, this, involving Thomas Massie and indeed other people who appear to have been crunched in this primary race by Trump's political fist. And yet at the same time, you see a lot of the conservative right at war with each other. So what are you reading into the sort of overall picture here about what's going on?
Oh, I've been interviewing Thomas Massie for years prior to October 7th, when he was really not talking much about Israel at all, applying, though, the same exact principles, applying to other issues as he's now applying to Israel, including being one of the leading opponents, for example, of the Biden administration's policy of financing the war in Ukraine on exactly the same grounds. He opposes U.S. financing of the Israeli military and the Israeli wars, which is people in Israel are doing extremely well. Ukraine is not our government's obligations. American citizens are. Our towns are falling apart. People don't go to college. They can't afford healthcare for their kids, the most basic things that a decent country provides for their citizens. And yet we're spending billions of dollars on countries like Israel, where millions of people have higher standards of living in that country than they do here in the United States. He's been the leading cause or advocate of privacy rights and opposed to domestic spying. So he's always been somebody who's been a leading advocate of many of the principles, including, by the way, free speech that the MAGA movement claimed before Trump got back into power again, that were most important to them. He aligned perfectly with it. The difference, though, is that he became an outspoken opponent of the U.S. relationship with Israel after October 7th, when the U.S. started spending not just $4 billion a year on Israel, but 20 and $25 billion, and however you count, far more than that, in the wake of all the wars that Israel was involved with. And because of that, obviously, Trump was a major factor. But the real difference in this race was that three pro-Israeli billionaires, led by Miriam Adelson, who Trump himself said is more loyal to Israel than she is to the United States, spent most of her life as an Israeli, was in the IDF, poured insane amounts of money, record-breaking amounts of money into this tiny little district where all you need is 50,000 votes to win. And if you don't think that $25 million is enough to sway 5,000 voters, which was the difference in the race, from one side to the other, you're just not living in political reality. We saw AIPAC do that last year. In 2024, they broke their own record. This year, they did it to Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, put $15 million in both of those primary races. That is a massive story that people who Trump himself says have either primary loyalty or at least equal loyalty to a foreign country are overriding what polling shows are people's opposition to Israel, to the war in Iran, and just drowning our politics in enormous amounts of unlimited money in service of this foreign country. And not saying Trump wasn't a major role. Obviously he was. He has a huge grip on especially Republican primary voters. But if you deny that that was at least as big of a factor, then you're just insulting the intelligence of anybody listening.
Well, Will Chamberlain,
I'm sure Will's about to do that.
Sorry, Buckley, what was that?
I was going to say, I'm sure Will Chambers is about to do exactly that.
I'm about to ask him to do exactly that.
Travis. Both of them are.
Well, I was going to preface it by saying that just before we came on air with this show, Donald Trump has gone public about a growing sense that people are getting that it's Israel trying to call the shots in Iran, that they forced him into the war in the first place, that they don't want it to end. They think that America should re-engage in the military strikes and so on. And Donald Trump's reacting pretty forcefully. Let's take a listen.
What have you said to Prime Minister Netanyahu about Iran and how long to hold off on strikes?
He's fine. He'll do whatever I want him to do. He's a very, very good man. He'll do whatever I want him to do, and he's a great guy. To me, he's a great guy. Don't forget, he was a wartime prime minister, and he's not treated right in Israel, in my opinion. I'm right now at 99% in Israel. I could run for prime minister, so maybe after I do this, I'll go to Israel, run for prime minister. I had a poll this morning. I'm 99%, so that's good. But no, he's a wartime prime minister, and I just don't think they treat him well.
Mr. President, what do you do?
I think they have a president over there that treats him very poorly.
So a lot to unpack there, Will, not least the idea of Prime Minister Donald Trump of Israel. Well, we'll watch that development with interest. But this central point around Thomas Massie, which I find really fascinating, is that pretty much everything he stands for, and we'll park the Israel part of this to one side for a moment, but pretty much everything else, as Glenn articulated, would be the kind of stuff that Trump campaigned on when he got re-elected. I mean, it was, I'm not going to meddle in foreign wars, particularly in the Middle East. I'm going to take care of cost of living, America first, et cetera, et cetera. And people have looked at this and gone, well, you've done the complete opposite. And here's Thomas Massie, who's actually continued to stand by the positions that Trump was espousing as a candidate, leaving a lot of people a little bit mystified here about why Massie becomes the bogeyman if it doesn't involve his criticism of Israel. Because what Glenn said is correct. You can not be a conspiracy theorist to recount factually that there were millions and millions of dollars pumped in by Israeli-friendly billionaires against Massie. And the only reason that could be, it seems to me, is because of his increasingly critical rhetoric about the Israeli government. What do you say?
Well, I think that's just simply mistaken. Remember, Thomas Massie wasn't broke here. He had over $10 million of his own to spend, sourced from libertarians nationwide. So if he wanted to get his message out there, he easily did so. And the problem was that his message was schizophrenic. And it's not Israel, it's the big, beautiful bill. Remember, I mean, you posed this statistic where you said 90% of the time he supported the Republican Party. That's a little bit misleading because the big, beautiful bill was the one bill last year that essentially contained the entirety of the president's agenda. And by voting against that, he voted against basically everything President Trump ran on. Massive increases in border security funding, funding for the wall, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, massive decreases in some discretionary spending. So it was the key part of his agenda, and he was the only Republican to vote against it. And so then you look at what was the message? You say pro-Israel donors spent, but what did they say to voters in northern Kentucky? They replayed President Trump's rally where he endorsed Ed Galbraith, called Thomas Massie the worst congressperson in the history of the country, disloyal to him, disloyal to the party. And I don't think the voters of northern Kentucky are stupid. They voted for the president by almost 2-1. They know what they wanted. They wanted a loyal representative, and they weren't getting that in Thomas Massie, and that's why he's not going to be in Congress starting in January.
Have they got the president they thought they were voting for in 2024?
Absolutely, they certainly think so. I mean, Thomas Massie had the opportunity to make the arguments about how, Trump was betraying his base. He wasn't making those arguments at all. Towards the end, he was making arguments about how me and Donald Trump have a lot of work to do still together, which is ironic because a few months earlier, he was talking about how the Trump administration was the Epstein administration. That's the schizophrenia I'm talking about. He couldn't decide whether he needed to be pro-Trump to appeal to the voters in that district who liked Donald Trump, or against him because of these supposed betrayals. In reality, it was Thomas Massie hallucinating the president's platform into what he wanted to be rather than looking at what it actually was.
Okay, Buckley Carlson.
Bears, can I just quickly ask Will a very quick question?
Sure.
Did the record-breaking amount of millions of dollars poured into this district in Kentucky by Miriam Adelson and 2 other Israel-centric billionaires, was that a significant factor in your view in Thomas Massie's defeat after 12 years in Congress?
Of course it was a significant factor, but that money probably would have been there regardless because President Trump had made Thomas Massie his target number 1, so he would have found donors to spend that money in any event. It's just that the pro-Israel donors were particularly happy to spend that money in this case, obviously because they don't like Thomas Massie very much.
Okay, let me bring in Buckley on this. What do you make of? What do you make of it, Buckley? In particular, do you think this is because of Israel, or do you think it's actually because he took on Trump, as Will just said, over the big beautiful bill, and that was pretty much all of Trump's agenda, and therefore, if you're going to do that, Trump would see that as a massively antagonistic, negative attack on what he wants to do, and so he decided to take him down.
I think Glenn made the case pretty convincingly with the data that he just presented here. I would just say I have a little bit different perspective in that we are so used to lying and obfuscation and weasel words, as we often see from Will Chambers here. But Donald Trump has clearly articulated exactly the way forward for the new MAGA coalition. He's straightforward and clear as he was in that tape that he didn't show the whole clip, I don't believe, but he's talking now. He's acknowledged his donors are rich Israeli billionaires. He's acknowledged his base is actually in Israel. He's acknowledged he's pro-endless wars. He's acknowledged he's pro-surveillance. He's against the Constitution. He's perfectly happy for Americans to be miserable economically. He's perfectly happy to listen to purveyors of global misery like Miriam Adelson, which is totally consistent with the people in Thomas Massie's district who suffer from joblessness and drug addiction and depression. Now we get more of that. It's kind of nice that Donald Trump made it very clear that there's going to be more disdain, more contempt, more drug addiction, more surveillance, more protection of pedophiles. It's kind of nice to know your enemy. And I think if you talk to people in the base, in the grassroots of the Republican Party, you'll notice that a lot of people are actually leaving.
It's exactly this kind of talk, which is why Ed Galbraith is now going to be the representative from Kentucky. Exactly this kind of talk. Republican primary voters heard this message, and they heard it, and they said,
Donald Trump talked over his supporters. The people who put him in office, Will, the people who put him in office voted for a very clear agenda, absolutely articulated over an entire decade. The people who voted for Thomas Massie in 24 are the same people who voted for Trump in 24. And they wanted less government surveillance. They wanted actually justice for pedophiles. They didn't want foreign wars. They didn't want more economic.
If you were right, Massie would have won, but he lost.
They don't want foreign interference in their country or in their district, and it's an absolute shame. But it is refreshing that Donald Trump has articulated that clearly, as he did last week when he said he does not care about Americans. He doesn't think about Americans before he makes decisions that impact their economic lives. So the other great thing is, the only straightforward thing that Ed Gallerin, deep state boob Ed Gallerin, who was too afraid to actually debate Massie, too afraid to articulate any of his positions beyond actually having a draft. So people in Kentucky now who can't find jobs, young people who can't find jobs, it's great. They can just go into the military and fight Israel's wars for Miri Matelson, Paul Singer, and all the rest.
Okay, I want to bring in Clay. Clay, welcome back to Uncensored. First of all, I want to play...
Arsenal.
Good man. I want to play a clip from Massie's concession speech and see what you think of this.
I would have come out sooner, but I had to call my opponent and concede, and it took a while to find Ed Gallerin in Tel Aviv. I did get the call through, though. I have called and conceded the race. We've been honorable the whole time, and we're going to stay that way.
So making a joke there, clearly, that his opponent is completely in the thrall and control of Israel. Ben Shapiro thinks this is all complete nonsense, unsurprisingly. Let's take a look at what he said.
Okay, the reality is that people who are pro-Israel do not like Thomas Massie because Thomas Massie has engaged in every conspiracy theory it is possible to engage in and has made common cause with the most anti-Israel people. That's true. But the reason that Thomas Massie is actually in trouble is because the Trump administration has decided to oppose him on the basis of completely other issues. And so the usual game that is now played right now on the right, in the very podcastistan right, the game that is played is there will be a critique that has nothing to do with Israel. And the first thing you do is you claim that it's about Israel in an attempt to gin up the crazier part of the Republican base.
Now, I would say, Clay, that the trouble with Ben Shapiro's position on this, and it may be why his own empire is crumbling like Rome in its last few days, is because he never accepts there is anything that could possibly be nefarious concerning anything to do with the Israeli government. And so I take what he says with a pinch of salt. And it is an undeniable fact that AIPAC and other pro-Israeli lobby groups put in over $9 million in a deliberate bid to unseat Massie. Now, I accept that two things can be true at once. That may be because they wanted to, and it may be totally unconnected with the fact that Trump wanted to get back at Massie for not backing his big, beautiful bill. But I don't think you have to be a massive conspiracy theorist to think there might be a link here. What are your thoughts?
I'll get into that, Piers. Let me start with this. The people of Kentucky's 4th Congressional District have agency. They can make choices. If Kamala Harris had been running against Thomas Massie and $1 billion had been spent on Kamala Harris in the 4th Congressional District, she would have lost. Every lobbying group in America could have spent money on the wrong candidate in Kentucky's 4th Congressional District, and it wouldn't have mattered, right? So ultimately, this race came down to a decision between two people. And the people of Kentucky's 4th Congressional District, and by the way, all my family is from Kentucky. Before they moved down to Nashville to work in the DuPont factory here, all of my dad's family was from Kentucky. There's a lot of hardworking, tough people in Kentucky, and they went out and they listened to the arguments and they decided by 10 points that they thought Gallerin would represent them better than Massie and the interest that they had. Now, was Donald Trump a big part of that? Yes, because Donald Trump would still win the state of Kentucky by 20 plus points if we had a presidential election statewide right now. What this really came down to is Donald Trump is more popular in the Kentucky 4th Congressional District than Thomas Massie is. And whomever Trump decided he was going to endorse, I believe would have won. Just like happened in Indiana with the state senators, just like we saw happen in Louisiana with the Senate race, Trump is more popular in the South, I live in Nashville, than any elected official anywhere in the South. And so if Trump comes out and says, this is my guy or this is my gal, his supporters are going to go out and vote. I actually think.
Then why did they pour a record-breaking number of money into Kentucky? Why did these billionaires pour a record-breaking amount of money into Kentucky? Are they just dumb? They don't realize what you realize they wasted it?
Let me just answer your question. Kamala spent $1 billion more in 2024 than President Trump's campaign did. If you talk to them, they believe if they'd had Kamala's money, they would have won in New Jersey and they would have won in Virginia. They won all 7 swing states. They spent money because in order to beat an incumbent, you have to make people aware that there is a challenger there. Everybody in the whole district knew Massie already. There's a reason, if you go to Louisiana, that no Republican incumbent senator had lost before 2012. Name recognition matters. If you have a brand new candidate that nobody knows, you have to introduce them to the district. Massie had been elected multiple times.
You need Miriam Adelson.
I think this was not about Israel. This was not about Israel. This was about the fact that Donald Trump has a very...
Why was Miriam Adelson involved? Why was she so involved? Why was her money so decisive?
There is a very small majority right now in the House. And the Trump team was frustrated because Massie, representing a rock-ribbed Trump district, was not supporting the primary agenda, the big, beautiful bill, trying to move on from the Epstein story. Has there been any benefit? He promised that there were going to be all these charges brought. And instead of being 100% behind President Trump's agenda, as the voters of Kentucky's 4th congressional district have now shown that they want their representative to be, he decided that he wanted to fight President Trump. He has that right.
Marjorie Taylor Greene voted for the big beautiful bill. Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I think it helps Thomas Massie to argue, Israel's against me, instead of pointing out the truth, which is he wasn't
why would he think
enough
that?
of President Trump's agenda for the people of Kentucky.
Marjorie Taylor Greene voted for the big. Marjorie Taylor Greene voted for the big, beautiful bill. She was on Trump's side with every domestic policy issue that you just said Massie impeded. Her blasphemy was the same as Massie's, which